It's always worth doing the formative assessments, particularly in your first few units, and especially as, in this case, the formative assessment will give you some materials that you can take into your summative and use as part of that. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that will fit in a second. So have a go at the formative. Use it as part of your preparation for your summative. And the formative asks you, what is an HR? What is HR professionalism? And how do you ensure you're effective and efficient? In this, you should begin by discussing what HR professionalism is, considering 2 or 3 authors who give you some ideas of the different types of knowledge, skills and behaviour that you need to be an HR professional. You should then talk about the CIPD, and we'd expect things like the CIPD Code of Conduct, the MAP, perhaps the future framework, before you finally move on to talking about continuous professional development and what that means to the HR professional, why we need to continuously develop. That will be approximately 1,500 words. You should submit that through the link in the assessment centre with a cover sheet, numbered headings and subheadings, and a reference page. So it's a kind of mini assignment which will help you with your summative. So write it just in the way that you're going to write your summative at the end of it. Harvard referencing throughout, and when you have done that, that will seriously help you to prepare. All of Unit 1, Development Professional Practice assignments and assessments can be written in first person. It's the only assignment that you are going to write in first person, so you can say I and me and my and so on. However, in the rest of your assignments, they're all in third person, so you can't say I or we or anything else in that. You need to write it in a more academic format, which will be explained to you in the other online classes. Okay, so just a little bit about the formative. Do we have any questions about the formative before we progress to the summative from there? So let's think about the summative assessment now. The summative assessment's a portfolio of evidence of approximately 2,600 words in total. You are allowed a 10% leeway, so you can do up to 2,850, and I suggest you'll need the majority of that extra 10% in order to make a good attempt at this summative assessment. We'll talk a little bit about what the word count doesn't include as we progress. But remember that this is a portfolio of evidence, so we're not expecting it to be written like a report. We don't need an executive summary or an introduction. We need a cover sheet, your 4 tasks, clearly numbered and headed, and then reference pages and appendices. You need to make sure that you include a good range of academic concepts, theories, and professional practice in your tasks. And you need to do that by completing your referencing in Harvard References, and that can be found, if you're unsure about it, in the resources section. There's a tutorial there for you to have a look at. So in preparation for this assessment, I suggest that you have a good read of the learning materials, the extra resources and so on that are provided, that you give the formative assessment a go, and that you make sure that you're confident in finding and discussing the Code of Conduct and the CIPD map. You might also want to have a look at the MyCPD map assessment, which reviews your knowledge, skills and behaviours against the map and highlights any areas of development. That will help you in task 1 and in task 4. You need to be confident for task 4 that you can do a SWOT, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, swotting yourself against one element of the map. And finally, of course, make sure you read the appropriate areas of your 8 textbook. Let's talk about task 1. Task 1 is about being an effective and efficient HR professional. The task asks you to evaluate what is meant to be an HR professional, making reference to the current CIPD profession map. Keyword in this is evaluate. You're going to need to do some evaluation within this task, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So, a good way to approach task 1 is to think about what it means to be an HR professional. And as you can see straight away, that links back to the formative. So if you've made a good job of that, got a positive pass mark in it and good feedback from your tutor, then that's something you can lift on your formative and put into your summative. You need to then build the first part of this task around answers from professionals about your skills, knowledge and behaviours as an HR professional. Make sure that you use numbered headings and subheadings within your work so that it's a clear and professional submission. Once you've done that first bit, which is can definitely be taken from your formative, it's time to start the second bit where you need to discuss the CIPD profession map. You'll need to discuss it, and you will need to then evaluate yourself against 3 elements of the map. And finally, you'll need to write a conclusion that says what you think is the most important skills, knowledge and behaviour and why you think that is. So what I'm going to do now is to break that down. So just as an example to get you started, we've got Ulrich, Younger, Brockbank and Ulrich who talk about being an effective and efficient HR professional. They tell us that the HR professional should be looking at what's happening in the outside world, in their business sector, for example, and seeing what trends are out there in business and also perhaps what their stakeholders are thinking about. So, for example, changes to the law. What are other organisations doing in terms of changes in the law? And what do we need to do in our organisation to make sure that we are ready for that? They also suggest that HR needs to think about what we want to achieve as a business and ensure that our teams and our departments are ready and able to progress us towards that result. They also suggest considering the individual. If we have an individual who shows promise, who looks as if they could be the leader of tomorrow, then is our organisation capable of keeping that person interested and developing their skills in order to give them enjoyment and engagement in the organisation and in their job role? Otherwise, if we don't, we're going to lose them. Remember that HR is not just an isolated activity, so many strings to the bow of the HR professional, and they will thread all the way through the organisation. So it's not just simply about communicating things out to the staff or recruitment, it's about sustainable and integrated solutions. For those of you who've been in HR for quite a while, you recognise that we changed significantly from being an operational personnel department to being more strategically involved as an HR management department. That doesn't mean to say that those day-to-day administrative processes aren't important. They are. They're very important. They're the ones that keep our organisation ticking. But we also need to be involved in long-term strategic planning and practices. The thinking performer is very important, and as an HR professional, we should all be aiming to be the thinking performer. You can see that some of these things link back to the reference that I gave you from Ulrich before. So contributing to the organisation, challenging the way things are done, reinforcing compliance and keeping in touch with our customers. We can see that threaded through that reference from Ulrich. We're told that we have 4 different types of people within the organisation. They sit in terms of effectiveness and efficiency like this. The thing performers in the top right hand corner. They are our strategic activists. They're very effective and they're very efficient. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to be there in terms of every single person in our organisation. That's absolutely fine. But where we want to be is up in that top corner. If you considered your own role currently and you thought, well, actually, perhaps I'm a little bit more of a automated bureaucrat, for example, I'm very efficient, but I'm not very effective, then one way of considering how to become more of a thinking performer is thinking about the job role that we currently do and considering how we can make that effective, more effective. Can we tweak things that we do to move us up and make us more effective? Perhaps we've done the same thing for years and years. Actually, we could do it differently, and that would improve the way things are done. Next, you should move on to talking about the CIPD. The CIPD tells us that the map defines the building blocks of effective people management practice across 10 professional specialisms and describes 8 fundamental behaviours that underpin good practice regardless of specialism. It's quite a straightforward and a little bit bland reference. One that really works for you, that describes what the map is and why it's important. The reference that I give here is CIPD, and I have put N.D. in brackets after it. What does N.D. mean? It does, it means no date. So if you're looking at references and you can't actually find a date that it was published, then you use N.D. So the next thing to do is to talk a little bit more about the CIPD map. Give us a short introduction about the map and its importance, as I mentioned previously. Include a diagram of it and ensure you reference where you got that from. Select 3 elements of the map. Put each element under a numbered subheading and tell us what band you see yourself being. Just evaluate yourself against each element and justify that banding. And finally, based on what you've written, tell us what you think is the most important skill